Welcome to our online training for how to be an events chair. This is a position that not every club has, but those that do, your events tend to be high profile. This position also isn't likely called events chair, but rather something specific to your big event. Culture show coordinator, conference chair, tournament coordinator. Regardless what it's called, in this video we'll run through what this position should know and how they can be most effective. In this video we're going to cover a lot, beginning with what the job entails, how to correlate that to the club's purpose, and how to plan appropriate events for your org based on that purpose. We'll then discuss how to get buy-in from your fellow officers and how to divide the labor appropriately. In terms of resources, we'll discuss the funding needed for big events and how to reserve the space. We're also going to focus on planning, so we'll discuss the timeline you need to start setting and making sure that you have everything you need. We'll then get into logistics with possible vendors you can connect with to make your events happen and how to market your event effectively. You might have a guest speaker, so we'll cover what that process entails as well as the process to secure insurance if needed. Lastly, we'll give you examples of tasks and checklists for both leading up to the event and day of tasks to consider. So starting at the top, you're appointed chair of your annual culture show, for example. What does that mean? What is your job? Your job is to create and execute events that connect to your group's purpose. You'll place the reservations for this space and start to delegate out responsibilities. You'll work with your fundraising chair to help raise money to pay for the event, and you'll create relationships with possible vendors that you'll use for things like catering. Your job is to research what sorts of costs you'll be looking at, and to become familiar with university policies that revolve around this type of event. Now, we keep mentioning the club's purpose, so it's important that you become familiar with it. You should understand the purpose and be able to see what appropriate spheres of activity might be. If you're the Checkers Club, should you be hosting a football tournament? It's okay to be creative, but these ventures shouldn't be a burden or a huge focus for your club. Your club should be actively creating goals for the organization, and these goals should inform the sort of events you're hosting. If one of your goals is to double the attendance at your annual tournament, that definitely affects you and how you plan for this tournament. At this point, we need to think about the scope of what you're doing. For some of you, your event is the pinnacle, the highlight of the year for the entire organization. It's going to take a lot of work and you'll likely need help. Talk to the other officers. Don't try to do this alone. You should be stepping back and looking at the division of labor. The fundraising chair should be assisting you to raise funds for the event, while the marketing chair is creating advertising for you. The treasurer might help you apply for the ASPB grant you need. Think of it this way. If you had 10 hours a week to work on the culture show, would you rather just one person invest 10 hours and probably miss a whole lot? Or would you rather have the 5 officers all doing 10 hours to deliver something truly special? While we're on the topic, let's discuss money. First off, does your event require money? In most cases, yes. You'll be needing supplies, marketing, decorations, all sorts of things that might incur fees. And now the obvious question, do you have that money? What potential budgets will it come from? Your ASUCR account, your off-campus bank account? If you don't have the money, where will you find it? Have you talked to the treasurer about the possibilities of grants? They likely know some avenues that you're not familiar with. Maybe you can find money from a sponsor like a local business that's willing to pay, or an academic department that can carry the financial burden for you. Another major factor, probably the earliest thing you need to be planning for, is your venue. Placing reservations is where it all begins. On campus, there's a few ways to initiate a reservation, including the hub scheduling process via reserve.ucr.edu. These rooms are free for orgs, but you'll be charged for major additions such as potential media costs or a room setup fee if you need tables and chairs for your banquet, for example. You can also go through hospitality to reserve space in other venues such as housing spaces or the alumni center. These spaces cost for the room itself and those extra things we just mentioned. Either way you reserve a space, you'll need to give a thorough description of your event. They don't ask you this just for fun. They ask you for a complete description so that they can help you plan and prepare. When you say in your description that you're doing a culture show, but you don't specifically request a stage, they might follow up with you and make sure that that's right. If you say you're doing a banquet but don't mention where the food is coming from, they'll ask to make sure you have a plan for how to get food into that space. Now, for many events, you might go off campus. You might choose to book a theater downtown for your culture show or your dance competition. You might book a fancy banquet hall for your once-a-year fancy end-of-the-year banquet. You always start by connecting with the management of that venue and making sure they're even available when you want to host your event. What can they offer and what's included in that cost? Are there certain restrictions that might be tough to get around? For most venues, they'll also require a deposit. So find out how much that is and then ask if the deposit is refundable in case your event needs to be canceled or rescheduled. Most venues will also ask you to provide insurance that covers your event. Here in Student Life, we can help you secure insurance, but for off-campus events, it might cost a few $100s, so something to consider when you're budgeting for the event. And then, just like on-campus spaces, you'll give them a complete and accurate rundown of what your event will entail. Let's talk about vendors. These are the various people and services that you might need to utilize for your event to go perfectly. Zoom out and think about your entire event from start to finish, and you'll get an idea which vendors you might need to utilize. Typical on-campus vendors include printing, usually for marketing and getting people to your event, catering to provide food, media, and tech needs for your space. Parking might be needed to coordinate your guests visiting that will need permits. Our physical plant office might be contacted to arrange tables and chairs to be set up, primarily if your event is outdoors, and many other offices that can assist you. You'll then need to think about how you're paying for those services. Either you'll use your off-campus bank account to pay directly, or you'll utilize your ASUCR budget if you're an undergrad group that has an account. Other ways to pay might include if a department is helping you, or if you receive a sponsorship from a department like ASPB. For off-campus events, you'll likely need to do more research because the venue may not connect you directly to the vendors that make sense. You also get the bonus of being able to compare quotes, so you can choose the cheapest option available. You'll then work out the logistics with the vendor, such as how to deliver any products to the off-campus venue, and you might have to pay deposits for these services. Off-campus events just require a little bit more work since these venues and vendors might not be familiar with each other. For on-campus events, you'll need to review the list of authorized vendors. If you're using a caterer, it needs to be a place that's already approved. If they're authorized, this means ASUCR might be able to give you a purchase order to take money directly from your club account instead of reimbursements. There's a full list of which businesses you can use and when their services expire. If you want to use a new vendor, like a specialized caterer, for example, there's a way to add new vendors, but it takes some time and some work on your behalf, so you should make sure it's worthwhile to do that. Once you arrange a deal with one of these vendors, you'll need to pay them. Make sure you pay them on time, obviously, and make sure your treasurer knows how to pay them. Do they need a check the day of the event, or can you prepay with a debit card? If you fail to do this correctly, your club might ruin your reputation with that business. We've heard of businesses having bad experiences and choosing not to work with any UCR student orgs after that, so make sure you're able to fulfill your side of the agreement. There also might be repercussions for not paying on time, such as late fees or even having the bill sent to collections, which is not a great thing for your club at all. When working on marketing for your event, you want to include the basics. This is a no-brainer. Where it gets more complicated is how you execute your marketing. Your group has access to the large kiosks around campus that you can request to put posters inside. You can work with the hub scheduling office on how to reserve those spaces. You'll also likely rely on social media for a lot of promotion, as well as in-person tabling. Often a personal invite means much more than a flyer they saw on Instagram. You can try tapping into various email lists, so consider reaching out to folks that might have access to these lists. For example, your culture show might be a good fit for the daily email that one of our cultural offices send out. If you need help creating this marketing, make sure to utilize our Graphic Design Center, which are paid student workers who create designs for student orgs free of charge. You can find them on Instagram at UCRSDC, or you can email ucrsdc@gmail.com, or stop into Student Life and ask to speak to them in person. We mentioned earlier that a venue might request that you get insurance coverage. For on-campus events, most of what you're doing is likely automatically covered, unless it's potentially high risk, like a martial arts tournament, or you're doing something involving a lot of folks from off-campus, including minors. If your event is off-campus, we'd recommend you purchase insurance. It's better to pay the deductible and be covered, as opposed to potentially facing a lawsuit if someone gets injured. Get in touch with either your student life advisor or the risk management office to ask questions about getting insurance coverage. Some of your events might also have guest speakers, So things like conferences and symposiums. Will you be paying this person? Like vendors, you'll want to make sure you have an idea how and when to pay this person for their time. If the speaker isn't affiliated with UCR, they'll need to sign what's called a hold harmless agreement. UCR staff, faculty, and students don't need to sign this form, which ultimately says that the university isn't responsible for what the person says. Their opinion is entirely their own. So now that you're thinking about all the logistics of making your event happen, let's talk about the timeline you'll need to create and then follow. You need to make a plan somehow, so try something like Google Calendar, along with adding calendar alerts to keep you reminded of things you need to do. Assign tasks to others, either other officers that have key roles to play, or individuals that might be on an event committee with you. Make sure you're following up with these milestones that they need to be hitting. And write all these things down somewhere. It'll be useful for your successor next year if the timeline is already created for them. Ideally, stick to this plan now. Avoid procrastinating and do as much as you can as early as you can. If things go sideways, have a backup plan for what you might do in the worst case scenarios. If something didn't go as planned, think about how you'd adjust or fix that mistake. To create this list of tasks, start with what needs to be done prior to the event. Make a list of each task assigned to a person and then make sure everything's getting done. Your job as the chair of this event is to hold people accountable and ultimately make sure it goes off perfectly. For the day of the event, it can be hectic sometimes, so create a list just for that day, with times and duties for each person. Go over this list with them and answer questions prior to the day so they're well prepared. Sometimes it can be easy to overlook something because you had no idea about it or assumed it was taken care of. The chair of an event should constantly be checking in with other officers about things, including that your fundraising has been successful and you have access to that money. Was your reservation placed and/or confirmed yet? Did the co-sponsorship you applied for work out? If no, you should definitely know that. Did you have people securing business sponsorships and did those go through? How much money do you have to spend now? Is your treasurer confident that they have access to enough money and they can pay for all the things you've lined up? In general, feel okay asking questions. You've likely never been the events chair before. If you're tasked with something and you don't know how to do it, ask. No one is born knowing how to apply for co-sponsorships. No one automatically knows how to apply for insurance coverage. If your officers don't know, you can always ask your dedicated student life advisor or your voluntary advisor for your club. We can at least point you in the right direction. You could also try connecting with other clubs and asking them how they did something. If you know of similar events, that chair might have wisdom that would benefit you. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to contact Student Life and ask for assistance. We'd love to help make sure your event goes smoothly. Ideally, let us know early, especially if you're concerned about fundraising and making sure the event is able to happen. Those are things that are started months before an event happens. You can call our office at 951-827-7344 if you'd like to talk to someone, or stop into Hub 229. Thanks for watching.